Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode of the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe. Today, I'm exploring a topic that's been on my mind recently, and it's the topic of tolerance. So today I'm going to be exploring this subject, the tolerance paradox. How do we balance acceptance and boundaries for our well-being? And I don't know about you, but I find the experience of being human sometimes really complicated. You know, the thing of help others, but don't be so helpful that you lose yourself in the process. You know, work hard to succeed, but don't work too hard that you burn yourself out. You know, take this morning, for example. I worked late last night because I've got a really busy week this week, delivering 3 different corporate client sessions, which is fantastic, but also means there's a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen. So this morning, after a late night, the question on my mind was, should I stay in bed to catch up on sleep, which I know is important for my well-being, or get up and exercise, which I also know is important for my well-being? You know, we're constantly having to navigate these decisions and paradoxes. And one of the paradoxes I'm navigating at the moment in my own life is this concept of tolerance. And it's kind of a question that I keep reflecting on. And it's a question that I'm in my conversation with myself on. I mean, do you ever do that? You know, have these conversations with yourself. And my question is, what's the right level of tolerance to have in order to live a good life? You know, one of the things I love about myself is that I'm constantly reflecting on who I am and how is that serving me in my life. You know, are there any parts of me that I want to improve to lead an even better life? And tolerance is something that I'm reflecting on right now. We know that people who are tolerant tend to be more accepting and open-minded, and they tend to be more relaxed as they can accept like diverse situations, people and thinking. But if we're too tolerant, we can tolerate situations, people, and behaviours that cross our boundaries. So my question for myself right now is, when is it right to be tolerant? And when are you being too tolerant? Because being tolerant without discernment can lead to pitfalls. As I say, in my own life, I'm really exploring this, and it's kind of fascinating to explore. And I don't claim to have all the answers, but I thought I'd share with you my exploration, as I often get feedback from people who listen to this, you the listeners, that my own reflections are useful for you too. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So once you've listened to the episode, let me know what you think. So here go my reflections. One of my strengths, I think, is my ability to be open-minded. I think it's what enables me to be such a good coach. You know, I'm non-judgmental. And that kind of allows me to walk alongside my clients as they explore what's best for them in their own lives. And it also kind of enables me to listen deeply and question respectfully and impartially. And I think it helps me to respect and value people regardless of their background, beliefs, identity. And I think tolerance is the foundation that I kind of believe helps me understand others and have empathy for them. And I think that my tolerance helps me to live a more relaxed life on the whole. Yet there are times when I'm not tolerant. For example, I have low tolerance for mess and clutter in my life. You know, my brain can't cope with mess in my house, much to my family's annoyance, I think. In this instance, I think I would benefit from being more tolerant of the mess. But I also know that having high standards and expectations can fuel high performance. So I don't want to tolerate a mediocre life. I don't want to tolerate a less than great experience. You know, how many times might we have been to perhaps a restaurant and not had great food or service, but kind of don't want to make a fuss? And I've done that too many times. And I kind of think, why should I tolerate if I'm paying good money? So can you see the paradox here? You know, when is it good to be tolerant? And how do we choose the things that we're tolerant of or not? Because by tolerating everything without discernment, we may kind of inadvertently allow our values, our principles, our beliefs to be compromised, and we can lose ourselves in that process. And if we become too tolerant, we can become complacent or apathetic. If we tolerate everything, will we accept anything and everything? So, and the other thing that I'm thinking of is if we become too accepting, we might overlook injustices or fail to kind of take action when it's necessary. So, one of the things that, you can think of in terms of leadership is, do we tolerate team members who keep making mistakes? It's a good value and virtue to be supportive and accepting, isn't it? But does that create complacency on our team? And does that create less than high quality? And we're saying that less than high quality will be tolerated. Because a high level of tolerance can create kind of an inclusive culture where kind of people feel comfortable and at ease. But if we have a low tolerance, does that create kind of this strict judgmental culture? And does that feel uneasy and stressful to work in? But I know there are times in my life when I've tolerated too much, perhaps that leaky tap that I keep putting off getting fixed because it feels insignificant and I don't have the time. But that almost daily drain on my attention and frustration, even though it's low level, the compound effect of that has an impact. So the question that I'm kind of holding in my mind is, how do we hold high standards in our life in a way that feels good for us and those around us? How do we create an environment that encourages growth and understanding, but without compromising what's important to us? Can you see the paradox here? That's why I think being tolerant is such a complex and subjective matter. And you can probably see why I'm giving it so much thought. But also here's the problem when it comes to our well-being. If we're not being mindful of our degree of tolerance, if we've not developed our tolerance muscle, we can get frustrated, annoyed with everyone and everything for not meeting our expectations, which can lead to really an unhappy life. There's a spiritual quote that says, peace begins where expectations end. But if we just go around tolerating and accepting everything, I don't believe that's the road to happiness either. Because if we're too tolerant, it can lead to kind of boundary violations. That excessive tolerance can lead us to ignore our personal boundaries, constantly accommodating others' needs and preferences without asserting our own. And I think that can just lead to frustration, resentment, and kind of exhaustion. Have you ever had that when you're perhaps arranging to meet somebody and they say, where do you want to meet? And you kind of go, oh, I don't mind, or what time works best? And you kind of go, oh, whatever time works best for you. I know I can fall into that trap. But if we're not careful, that high degree of tolerance that we'll tolerate whatever response somebody else wants can actually lead to a decline in our self-esteem because we're not holding our self-worth. And actually that has an impact on our well-being if we're not taking our needs into consideration. So being excessively tolerant can mean that we take on the emotional labour also of constantly managing kind of other people's demands or needs or managing conflict. And that emotional burden can take its toll and kind of lead to that exhaustion. And it's also important to say that if we're too tolerant, we can inadvertently support injustice. And, at an extreme end, that might be, the mistreatment of somebody or a group of people. But that also can mean the mistreatment of ourselves. We tolerate a less than okay behaviours from people. But if you continue along that continuum of kind of tolerance, it means that we can neglect our own needs. We're prioritising everybody else over ourselves and we're just tolerating that. And again, that impacts our stress and our well-being and our mental health. But also, I believe it impacts our personal growth, because if we're constantly tolerating situations or behaviours that are unsatisfactory, we're not growing and challenging ourselves to ask ourselves what we want and what's important. So there are no easy answers, I think, when it comes to this concept of tolerance. There are going to be times when being more tolerant is useful, but there are also going to be times when being less tolerant is also useful. I think the key for me is getting clear on what my values and needs are, and I would encourage you, if you're reflecting on this, to do the same. And I think I've got 3 kind of key questions around this. So if there is a situation, it's asking, does this really matter to me and why? What's the impact of tolerating this? And what's the impact of not tolerating it? So we're almost doing an ecology check. We're checking in with our values, but we're also doing a systemic check of, I might be able to tolerate this, but what is the ripple effect of it? Or I might not be able to tolerate this, and what's the ripple effect? I know that kind of reflecting on this concept of tolerance is having a positive impact on my life. It's kind of putting me back in the driving seat. It's empowering me. It's getting me really connected to my values and taking conscious choice about what I want to do. And I hope it invites you to do the same. Look around at your life. Where are you being too tolerant? Where are you putting up with too much? And where in your life are you really being too bothered? And having a low tolerance level is having an impact. And what would you like to do about that? I'd love to hear any reflections you've got on this subject. Thanks for listening. And until next time, take care. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.